My name is Nancy Fulton, and I currently run events for 50,000 plus entertainment industry pros here in Los Angeles and a growing number across the United States. If you go to www.nancyfultonmeetups.com, you can find a list of all of the previous workshops that we've covered, and you'll find we have stuff on how to produce a film for $10,000, how to develop and build a project that's $1 million or more, how to write query letters. We're going to be talking with Mark Sawicki about creating visual effects in films. And he has a very long career and lots of credits working in the entertainment industry to create the kind of effects that make projects more sellable and make projects more attractive to audiences worldwide. And with that in mind, I'd like, if you don't mind, Mark, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about how you became somebody who designed and directs visual effects, and sort of the work that you've done as an instructor, as well as the work that you've done in the industry.
Oh, it's a big, well, hello everyone to begin with. Thank you for joining this meeting. My origins are as a fan. I love movies, and particularly horror movies or monster movies or science fiction. I'd run home as soon as school finished for the 4:30 movie and cross my fingers and just prayed it would be a horror movie or something. And so I was a fan first, and then as I got into my high school years, I had a hobby since I was the age of 3 of sculpting things. And when I was a teenager, about 12, pre-teenage, I found my parents had purchased a home movie camera, Super 8 camera, and they used it once and then just put it away in the closet. Well, I found it, and then I found that, wow, if I just press this one single frame button, I can make my clay people move, and that just lit me on fire. So all through my high school years and early college, I just experimented in this little garage studio that I had and made all these little animated films, and I really just got attracted to it. One of my heroes, of course, I learned about in 1972 was Ray Harryhausen, who didn't use clay. Those weren't clay monsters, but by gosh, they were dinosaurs, and they had people poking sticks at monsters, and so that was even got me deeper into the addiction. And thankfully, my parents, they sort of saw that this kid was kind of dedicated to this, and they sent me to USC Film School. And I remember when I first attended there, that was back in the mid 70s. They said, well, I don't know where you guys are going to go, And fortunately for me, because I was so odd, loving visual effects and things of that nature, they weren't quite sure. The only thing stop motion going on was the Pillsbury Doughboy. And there was like one job, one shop in all of the world that did that, But fortunately for me, there was a little film, you may have recalled, it's called Star Wars.
I don't think I've ever heard of it, but I'll try to.
Yeah, anyway, when I got out of school, that thing just went to the moon, and it was just the most successful thing. Hollywood said, hey, we make a lot of money on these kind of movies, and they were sucking up any geek that knew anything about visual effects. But even then, I didn't hit the mainstream until I was 30. I had worked on walk videos and educational films and putting titles on military films and things like that. But when I hit 30, it was almost like I was discovered in a way. I was learning on my own about how to do blue screen. They used to use blue back then. Back in the old days, it was all blue. Well, green took over,
I remember.
Yeah. And I was experimenting back in the film days on an optical printer. I was working out for a place that had an optical printer, which is a device that copies film and does visual effects. And I found a mentor for myself named Bill Taylor, who was Albert Whitlock's camera person. Albert Whitlock was the famous matte painter, did all the matte paintings for Alfred Hitchcock and Disney, and just spectacular. And I kept asking Bill questions about this rather complex blue screen process, because back in the day, it wasn't pushing a button. It was 12 pieces of film in several days. It was just very involved. And he'd just happily answer my questions. And then one day he called me and said, hey, you want to work for me? And that just turned my life around. So I spent 10 happy years at Illusion Arts, because he formed a new company. He was working at the Universal Studios matte department. until the studios got more interested in real estate than that departments, and so they broke off. And then that sort of started a real amazing career for me, and I became like their head matte camera person. And then from then I was invited by Ernie Farino, who I had worked with before Illusion Arts at Roger Corman on Galaxy of Terror.
Yes.
And
Roger
Infinity.
Corman, a known brand.
Yeah, it's a classic. and he was working on the original Terminator film. And he said, Mark, I'm in trouble. Our optical printer camera person just quit in a huff. You know, can you come down and help out? And that was like the most fun that I had. He was designing Termovision, and I gave him some, well, we can do this, or we can do that, or this, and pick one, and then Bob's your uncle, and then I was off back to where I was working. And then he called me back when he became an effects supervisor on Tom Hanks' From Earth to the Moon.
Yes.
And that was a great thing. That was kind of a transitionary phase, because that's where half that TV series was done with traditional models and photography, and the other half was computer graphics.
Yes.
It's almost like the Inky Poo and, what the guy with the hammer. and CGI had a lot to benefit from that. Typically, the spaceships had to tumble in every which way, and to try to rig a physical model to tumble in every single axis was not only difficult, but nearly impossible. So with CGI, you could do anything, and you could do it over it again perfectly without a lot of setup and everything. So very early on, CG was very useful in that respect.
So is it the case that if people check out your IMDb, they'll see this long raft of credits. One of the things that made it interesting to interview you, I think there's a huge push in the entertainment industry at the moment to kind of do everything CG, and there's reasons to do that. There's a lot of reasons to do that, because it's certainly getting easier to use. New technologies are coming along, but and one of the things we're talking about in this particular event is the fact that there are decisions that filmmakers have to make very early in the course of their projects, before they do the budgeting, before they do the shooting, before they do the scheduling, because it will impact what they're going to spend for their effects. And it's not always the case for a project that they should be using, hiring VFX teams like Industrial Light and Magic or other big companies are trying to do things visually, because there's optical tools and techniques that will work better and more swiftly. And you sort of have a set of skills that crosses from more traditional optical practical effects all the way through to the very latest in technology for creating virtual environments. So in fact, you just came out with a book, right?
Yes.
You want to go ahead and talk about it for just a second?
Oh, yeah. It's called Filming the Fantastic with Virtual Technology and Filmmaking on the Digital Backlot. And that's kind of, yes, the latest and greatest. But when you say CGI, I gave thought to this part of your questions that you shared with me earlier. And the latter part of my career, I spent 10 years at a company called Custom Film Effects. Our main guideline was, whenever possible, we would not choose to use computer graphics. Because the thing about computer graphics, they're great. I mean, you see the Avengers and it's like fantastic, absolutely perfect. And that's why the movie cost, what, $200 million or something? Because instead of like a handful of people doing it, you are all of a sudden saddled up with 100 people doing it, because you're having to recreate reality. And a lot of times it's so much faster, easier, cheaper, and bulletproof to shoot a real thing and combine it with another real thing, rather than real photography with a synthetic dinosaur. Now, these synthetic, like Jurassic Park is fantastic, because those dinosaurs could do things far better than anything that could be done by a puppeteer. It was originally supposed to be a go motion project, but doing it that way, you would get the real with the real, but the time frame would be just staggering. But for many middle of the road films, you don't need to do that. As soon as you, well, I'll have one example. I shot some effects for a film called Romance and Cigarettes. And it was a romance, right? And they had this pivotal shot, which was just sort of telling the story of these lovers. It was basically a car driving off in the distance, and these cigarette butts would be slowly tumbling in the air. Well, they said, okay, well, we're doing that with CGI, right? So they found a CGI company, and there is a trajectory to CGI. And so the very first thing they saw was like a tube that was painted white on one end and brown on the other, but it was a straight, perfect tube that was tumbling. And they looked at that and said, looks like a cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
You're fired. You know, of course they would have gotten to realism, you know, weeks or, you know, a couple of weeks, 3 months or a month to get these things. But at the time, Custom Film Effects, we had some smokers who were working for us. And we had these film cans that were ashtrays, and they were loaded with the perfect props, these butted out cigarette butts.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just got a high-speed camera and a green screen and just dumped these butts in front and composited them with a traditional green screen. And they went, wow, that's it. You're brilliant. You did it in a day, you know. And it was like, it's so much faster. But I think we've gone from a golden age of effects into a gilded age of effects. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, in the golden age, everybody was trying everything. Budgets were fairly nominal, and we were exploring. CGI had its place, but it wasn't dominant. You know, it's when you can't do it any other way, then you would push that button because it was very, very expensive. But the ease of digital and compositing led to the phrase, well, we'll fix it in post.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so much has been fixed in post that the ramifications of fixing it, which are easily accommodated by an ILM or some larger firm, can be devastating to a low budget production, mm-hmm. you know, where you just assume. So when I say gilded age, it means that, yeah, great things can happen if you got the moolah, right? But everybody else underneath, they've got $1.98 to do these things.
My understanding is that the courses that you teach specifically are designed to arm the filmmakers that are moving through the program with effects information that or effects techniques that start with optical, move on through green screen. Like that, your objective in providing the training to the students is to give them a full set of options, so they don't automatically think that they have to move into creating computer generated effects. I mean, almost everybody's going to be editing their film using editing tools. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody's going to, if it's got effects, it's going to use some level of green screen and so forth. But it's not the case that they have to move up to the highest level, you know, computer generated models, computer generated explosions, computer generated fire, computer generated fireworks. Right. So can you talk about what you think filmmakers need to know in order, what families of effects filmmakers need to know in order to have a better understanding of what their options are when they want to create visual effects?
Yeah, well, what I do in my film schools, and I'm fortunate that they give me free rein to develop my own curriculum, because you have a problem. I mean, you have animation departments where all the students are really deep into Maya or the Unreal Game Engine or something like that, and they're really focused on that. But they're like building a rocket to go to the moon, and it's such a discipline that it's not really. You know, you get someone who wants to direct and you say, okay, well, you got to learn Maya. Well, that ain't going to happen. It's just such a different world, you know. And the cinematographers are kind of the same. They want to like shoot things. So basically my philosophy is to train directors and cinematographers particularly as to training their eye as to what to look for. So for example, a crowd shot, you know, you've got, in the script, we have 100 people showing up for this thing and we don't have any money, but hey, we'll buy you all lunch, you know, and they get 100 people and then 25 of them show up, you know, it's like, oh, what are we going to do? You know, we've got to shoot today. So you do you don't call up a CGI person and give us the crowd replacement thing. And well, that's going to cost you $5,000 or whatever, something outrageous. Mm-hmm. You just take that small group of 25 and you shoot them over here, then you have them switch their outfits, and then they move over here, and then you shoot them there, and then they move there, and they move there, and then by clever, simple compositing, you do in one day have 100 people. So I train my cinematographers to do just that, mm-hmm. and build up issues. You know, the first two groups are separated, so it's really easy. You put a split screen, hey, yo, they're together. But the next ones overlap a little bit. So now they have to learn about rotoscoping and how long that takes. And I want the cinematographers to know that if they make a decision on the set and they say, fix it in post, I want them to know what that means. So I'm forcing them to fix something in post that they actually shoot to give them more of a well-rounded idea rather than flippantly say that, because they'll say that, then they're off the picture and the producer's left holding the bag.
Because those effects are actually things that happen in post-production. Took a look at your curriculum. One of the things I found interesting is you have optical effects. You know, like if you need to make it so an ocean disappears, you have visual footage where you have somebody's got a house and you're looking off toward the ocean and you need to make the ocean disappear because you want to turn that into the Grand Canyon or a green valley. You talk about specifically optical effects, or using sort of the matte techniques or optical effects in order to create.
Yeah, that would be more like a matte painting technique. The term optical would, of course, refer back to the old photochemical process. So optical is kind of, they don't use optical printers anymore. You could switch that for After Effects,
right?
For example, yeah.
Right, and then you also talk. And then you talked about using different modeling techniques. There's always using things like claymation or clay and so forth, and physical models, and also creating. I think techniques that they used to use in the old days when they needed to have a ship sink, and then they'd have like a model of a ship, and it would seem like there were people on it, and then the ship would sink, and somehow or other they were shooting something really tiny, but managing to make it feel very large. And having tried to model boats before, and having spent many years trying to get water to look like water, I can tell you it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, trying to get water to look like water.
Oh yeah, well that comes to mind, a brilliant technique that Albert Whitlock came up for Airport 77 or 70. Well, they made a ton of them, right? And they had an aircraft crashing in the water. Well, they did it in the water tank at Paramount. And the problem that you have is that the plane looks really good at a distance. The sky and the water looks pretty good at a distance. It crashes, makes a really nice thing. But as soon as the water gets close to the camera, it starts going out of focus in the way it's getting obvious, But what Al did, which was brilliant, is he would just put a simple split screen where the plane hit the water. So from here back is miniature water. Plane goes behind the mat, and then this part was real ocean. So this was an action, and it blended perfectly, and you totally bought it. So you're taking whatever is failing, and you're finding ways of covering it up.
And that actually it's actually a lot faster to shoot the model crashing, and have just composited in with regular water than trying to go ahead and build an entirely digital scene with a digital plane that digitally crashes into digital water with the correct everything, correct splashing.
Yes. To get the unreal looking real is a huge challenge.
So when you talk to filmmakers who are currently working on a project and they bring you a screenplay where they've got that they want a budget, or they want to figure out how they're going to shoot, and they have to do that before they start looking for money, because they need to make sure they raise the right amount of money, not just for production, but for post-production as well. So they really don't want to fix anything in post if they can avoid it. How do you work with them to determine what sets of to help them figure out how to start creating a budget that represents what it will really cost to shoot this project most cost effectively and most swiftly? Is it something where you take the script and you go through and you say, here are the options, you've got this set of effects that have to be done, and you've got options here, 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 and here, and here's what I would recommend based upon the budget that you think you're going to have, or the amount of money you think you can raise, versus what here's what your options are.
Right, and when I go through a script, that's exactly right. You go through it page by page, and a lot of effects are maybe they're just establishing things. An establishing shot would be primarily a matte painting, and they have to determine, is it moving? Is there a dimensional component to it? But if it's a standalone, so to speak, you've got many more options. If you're only going to see it once, then maybe you can afford to just get a small model or something that is only going to be seen from one perspective and do it old school. If
Mhm.
it's something that's habitually used throughout the movie and it's having to do all these fantastic things, then you might say, well, this thing, maybe we should go CGI with this because you're seeing it again and again and again. And
Mhm.
you have to have consistency in the
Mhm.
portrayal.
Does your analysis also extend to the stuff you talked about, monsters and creature effects, and does your analysis extend to whether or not they use um, matte, like, because creatures are almost the hardest thing these days, aren't they? Because they can be totally, it's totally possible to create a digital creature in the Unreal Engine and control it using motion, motion control,
Motion capture.
motion capture technology.
Right.
But it's also possible to create appliance, creatures, dummy creatures that act you can control like puppets, and it's also possible to create incredibly lifelike masks and
Yes, and I'm a big fan of that. If you look at Weight of Water, very successful picture, totally old school, full creature body makeup.
mhm,
I'm a big fan of hybrid things. Like there's a movie called Death Note, and the body was a traditional rubber guy in a rubber suit, but his head was merely had tracking markers on it.
mhm,
And Willem Dafoe had a facial motion capture. So basically, it was a half shot on the set with the body, heads removed and replaced with a CGI puppet head on top of the other one. So the person wearing the bodysuit can now breathe, which was always difficult when you covered them all up. But the
mhm,
most important thing you get out of a creature suit is this.
mhm,
You can actually touch the actor. You can actually see and interact with the creature. You can light them under the same lighting.
mhm,
It's as close as you can get to a performance that's real.
mhm,
You're much better off because many ways, I mean, yes, you can make a full CGI creature, but let's say you've got motion capture like they do in Planet of the Apes, which worked really well. And you can see the live actor right next to the mocap performer. They're both in the same shot, but then it looks, oh, it's great. Well, we'll just put a monkey over this one and it's done. But it's not.
mhm,
Because they're in the shot, you've got to remove that guy.
mhm,
And hopefully you shot the background all by itself
mhm,
so that you have something to remove him with.
mhm,
And then if the camera is moving all over the place, that has a problem. So it's easier to have the mocap performer outside of the set
mhm,
so that the live actor is pretending to react with someone, but then you don't have all that removal
mhm,
issue. But then you also, if they have to shake hands, you've got another problem.
mhm,
So it goes into storyboarding, and let's board this out now. Okay, they have to shake hands, and now if that was a close up, then your makeup guy just has to make a creature hand that shakes the other guy's hand, and then after they shake, they're apart. Then it's back to CG,
mhm,
and you've saved so much money because if you had the CG person there, then they can't really connect. One is kind of jiggly. You got to draw in the shadows, and it
mhm.
winds up being a post production cavalcade of catastrophe.
So, so is it the case that if a producer wants to shoot a script that has a lot of special effects for it, do you think it's necessary for them to engage a storyboard artist to work with them in the development stage to actually start doing the storyboards prior to doing the budget so they have an idea of they can
Yes,
actually figure out what the pricing is?
absolutely, absolutely. In the old days, if you're just shooting a police TV show drama, they would just have the script open up, and the director would oftentimes just draw a line. Oh, I'm going to cover this line to this line
Mhm,
in wide shot, this line in close up, this line in medium shot, right?
mhm,
But when you're dealing with effects that have so many different elements to them,
mhm,
I say it's essential to draw it out. The worst thing that can happen, and it's really weird. This never used to happen,
mhm,
but you'll go on a set and everything's all planned out. The camera's going to be there and the light's going to be there and everything. And the director goes, "Oh yeah, now what? I want the camera over there now." Throws everything out the window. And what they have these detailed note sheets, these data sheets that effects supervisors fill out, and that's become so prevalent that there's a little like disclaimer, you know, done under protest, it says.
mhm,
which kind of covers them because, you know, they were planning to shoot it this way for X amount of money, and now everything's out the window and the meter's running. So that never used to happen. I mean, if you shot a Roger Corman movie, that camera was here and it could only pan 1 foot. If it went 2 feet, you're off the set. It was that tight, but that good planning just saves so much pain and a lot of money.
Is it the case that, I think you talked about the fact that a lot of times there are effect shots that you really only see at the, for establishing shots at the beginning of a film or beginning of a TV show, or it gets used over and over again as a sort of an opening sequence,
right,
to put you into the location? Is it the case that, and those a lot of times are the kind of thing that it certainly doesn't make sense to spend huge quantities of time or money on? It needs to be a killer effect, but it only has to look good from one angle. When is there a point at which you think it makes sense? So you and I both know that we met working for a company that actually does use the Unreal Engine to create digital environments and to put characters in those digital environments, and then also to put digital characters controlled by motion capture into the same scenes. Does it? And I think you're indicating that people should sort of, before they enter the time where they're going to try to use that technology, they really do need to know what's going to be they need to have an image of what's going to be on every single scene, every single minute of film. They need the storyboards, they need to be able to do the planning, because there's going to be more time spent in pre-production and in post-production and to make that actually work, because they have to plan to create the whole environment, the whole character, and they have to do the things mechanically. Some things they're not going to be able to do with the digital environment. They're going to need to use practical effects. Is that correct?
Yes, if you look at any of those, I mean, it's quite humorous to look at. I mean, there's great promise for that digital backlot technology, and right now it's right on the cusp. I think the great advantage is that you can almost, and I don't want to backtrack here, but you have more freedom, almost as much freedom as you do on a live action set. So let's say you're shooting a scene in a very expensive set, it's built like a Victorian bedroom or something like that. Because the camera in those situations are shooting actors up against green, but the camera has full freedom of movement, and the background is tied into that movement. You can actually see the composite in real time as it's happening. You can almost work as fast as a regular live action. But there are certain things that don't lend themselves. It's better to have someone stand on a real floor, for example. I think the thing that's really misleading, especially in the How We Did It videos on all these big budget films, is you got these actors in these big green rooms, and it looks like, oh, well, we don't need a cinematographer. We'll just put them in a green room and it's done, right? And what's done is that, you'll composite someone, just like the Zoom can composite me in front of some still background if I hang green behind me. But the lighting will suck because you're lighting for the green screen rather than your subject. So it's totally ass backward. And the idea of this total immersion into a green environment, while handy and quick, is the anathema to good filmmaking. It should be like the old days where the green is 20 feet away from the actors. And so if you didn't like the actors, they'd be a black silhouette. That's what it should be.
But you need to have a big enough, in order for that to work, you need to have a big enough green screen environment to make it work. You need to have, and the floor, if you're illuminating the floor, then it's hard to illuminate the floor underneath an actor's feet without illuminating the actor at all. So replacing the floor gets more difficult
Well, if the floor becomes part of the composite, right? So if you have a wooden floor the actor stands on, and it's actually there, or in the example, you're throwing a carpet down on top of the green screen and the actors stand on the carpet, they lean on a real table. So the props and the furnishings are minimal, because the green only has to cover where the actors move and the props. So it doesn't have to be beyond. Matter of fact, it's better if you don't have a lot of green, because it's just more spill that hits the actor.
Mhm.
But you want to be very careful with perspective and distance, and that is more difficult when you're shooting a real background to combine with a real foreground,
Mhm.
because then that camera placement is critical.
Mhm.
If the camera is being automatically placed at the right place within an Unreal game engine,
Mhm.
that part of the equation is no longer critical because they're locked together and you're actually seeing what it's doing.
Right.
So
So if
you're
you
not
change, if you
matching anything, it's already pre-matched, so
right,
to
so
speak.
if you move the camera and you move the camera on set, and it's on there's a digital background being created behind it. Moving the camera on set changes what's in the background as well as changing your view of the character.
Yes,
So it's doing all the compositing automatically.
right.
So when you work so some you have a screenplay, you sort of break it down to figure out what the effect shots are, then you storyboard the effects, and then you start choosing the technologies that you're going to use to create them. Do you take into account what the future life for the intellectual property might be later? In other words, is if somebody's shooting a series, then and it might be the case you're going to go back to this environment again, or then it might make sense to do something where you're creating full bore three-dimensional models or something, and you make the investment for digital characters, or you make some of these changes because you think, okay, we're shooting this film and then we're going to immediately roll into shooting a second film or a third film, and the intellectual property will be handy. Like, do you have to factor in what the long-term project is for that producer, whether it's just a single one-off thing, in which case it's just get it done as quickly as you can, and then or versus it's something that, like, it's going to be a franchise and there's going to be project after project after project. It might make sense to create the digital geometry because you're going to use it in the future.
Well, the good thing about digital geometry is it's easy to store, isn't it?
Hmm.
Though there are problems sometimes. Technology. I remember when we worked on Earth to the Moon,
Hmm.
we built wonderful models of the NASA spacecraft, both digitally and in the other. But a lot of that data was stored on exabyte tapes,
Hmm.
and now you can't find an exabyte tape player anywhere.
Right.
So if you are going to archive something, it has to be in a place that, as things get obsolete, it gets transferred to something that's more stable. But
Right.
there is something to be said for that. I mean, Paramount just sold off all those wonderful Star Trek models and props for a fortune. But it was
Hmm.
probably costing them a fortune to keep them in a warehouse somewhere too.
That's true.
That's the sad thing about it, because I really have a great love for models and stuff, but it's really hard to keep them. Those studios have done that for years. If you go to the back lot of Universal, you've got a whole bunch of street lamps all in, because so they can move them in. Okay, this is New York 1852. What kind of street lamp did they have? Oh, that's down on the Third Street warehouse. So pick them up from there and stick them up. And
Hmm.
so that was kind of a constant thing. But I think with digital, and particularly the Unreal game engine sets, it's it's becoming much easier to preserve and archive, and then nothing's broken when you bring it back in, and it's clean, or you can tarnish it or not,
Right.
and it's great. The only difference that you have is the tangibility. It
Hmm.
it still has that CGI look about it,
Hmm.
and a lot of that isn't it's just due to the speed at which it has to run,
Hmm.
right? Because in order to compute everything to be real, for instance, if you compute lighting with radiosity techniques, it may take an hour to make something look absolutely dead nuts real for one frame.
Right.
So, since we want to have everything be real time, you've got to make compromises somewhere.
Hmm. Well, and I think you mentioned the fact that the lighting's really important when it comes to that
Yeah.
equation. It's like, even if anything that's real in the environment has to be lit correctly, or it's not going to look real. Can um, When it comes to doing stunt work,
Yes.
so first of all, it is the case that if you have an existing environment, let's say that I want to shoot at Ten Oaks in Louisiana, which is one of the most famous plantations on earth, and I want to shoot there. And does it make sense, even though you're not planning to do any CGI, to go ahead and find a way to capture that environment digitally, so that when you come back, if you want to do a pickup shot, you don't have to go back to 10 Oaks to get it. You can, like, if you shot a scene in the living room, you can scan the living room, bring it in as a digital
Right.
environment. and then shoot the pickup scene without having to actually fly all the way back? In other words, do you think it's going to be the case that people start, as a rule, digitally capturing their environments? Because there's tools that do that, right?
Yes, yes, but there are tools that do that. But let's say you're
How do they
talking about,
actually work, if you don't mind me asking?
well, that they would to get the dimensionality, you would use these devices called LiDAR, which is
Hmm.
laser scanning, and
Hmm.
one won't have to do it. You know, I visited Gentle Giant Studios recently, and they're experts at this, absolutely experts. And they showed me a LiDAR they did of a basketball stadium. But you have to place a LiDAR here, scan it, move it over here, move it over there. So it's triangulating all of these things to get this perfect dimensional model. So you got that, but now you got to texture the damn thing, right? Now, the best way to capture, and I think it's going to be too time consuming to go back,
Hmm.
but the best way to capture a real environment is to uh, go before sunrise or after or at dusk. So everything is in ambient light. And then you just shoot the hell out of everything. Like this microphone I have here, right? If we're going to make this into a CGI model, I would take photographs of it all the way around. Click, 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 and at the top and at the bottom. And software will stitch all these together and actually make, out of photographs only, a fully dimensional microphone. And
Hmm.
because it was shot in ambient light, it's all flatly lit. And so when that model is put into an environment, you can light it afterwards. You can put the key light here or there, and it'll affect the model. But it takes a long time. Elliot Mack made wonderful photogrammetry captures of the Venetian Square, St. Mark's Square,
Hmm.
and it took a whole month. It's brilliant. And what I did not realize, which is different from traditional photography, is that you can get really close and take these pictures so that when it does become a dimensional model, when you push in on them, it doesn't lose detail.
Resolution, because that would be the thing.
Yes.
If it's created based on photographs, then it means the resolution of the photograph might conceivably matter. If
But if you have a
well, you,
bunch of close-up photographs,
Mhm.
then the resolution continues. It's very similar to the way they shot the 300,
Mhm.
where they would have two cameras capturing the action.
Mhm.
One had a wide angle lens and one had a narrow angle lens. And you would take both and you had these tremendous push-ins that you would do. You get this wide expanse of all these people fighting and all of a sudden you're zooming through the crowd and you go right up and you see the actual sword on somebody's hand and that there's no loss of detail. That's because you switched from the wide angle lens to
Mhm.
the tight lens. So it just went from a 4K down to where it became a 1K extraction that switched out and it became 4K again on the next camera
Mhm.
and got in. So you have this, and you're seeing that in the iPhone 11. When I first saw this iPhone 11, that's the one that's got the three cameras, right?
Mhm.
The first thing I thought of was like, that goes back to 1930, where
Mhm.
cameras used to have a rotating three camera thing.
Mhm.
But the brilliant thing that the iPhone 11 is doing is that it's doing the same thing that the 300. So it's shooting the same thing simultaneously through those three cameras that allows you to do those infinite push-ins without a loss of quality.
Mhm.
Whereas if you just shot it with one lens, the more you push in, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And then when you finally, like if you went from me up to my nose and I'm just one single thing, my nose is going to get really grainy and
Mhm.
fuzzy and everything. It has no resolution. But if you shoot me here with one lens and then here with the other lens and here with the other lens, there's no loss of resolution at all.
Right, you can fade, but you can move between those three. It's like
Yeah,
having a camera with three lenses shooting simultaneously. You can transition at any point. Can you
that's correct.
can you talk about camera technology is part of effects technology in a huge way? What cameras people choose to shoot with, what technologies, what lenses they choose to shoot with, and there's sort of a crazy convergence between. We used to have film cameras and they had film lenses, and then we had, we're going to have video cameras came along, and then we moved into having like Canon cameras, which used to be just for normal photographs, suddenly being used to shoot films. And now it seems like we have phones actually being 4K resolution, and now shooting with multiple cameras simultaneously. So do, do you factor, when you're thinking about your effects, do you actually think about in terms of, okay, what camera technology are we going to be using, or what camera technology is best for this particular project. Because if you could shoot a film using let's say somebody is doing a 250K project or something like that, and they can shoot on iPhones, you could have probably 5 different iPhones. Talk about coverage. You could just put those little phones anywhere. You could be shooting 5 camera, you wouldn't have to do multiple takes ever.
No, it just takes you 300 years in the editing room. That's all it does.
Exactly. But I mean, I get it's
Yes.
do you see a convergence between all of these different video technologies in terms of just capturing the images?
Well, it all goes back to the image, regardless of, it was sort of that old thing, that you only respected a camera person because he used a certain brand of camera. Oh, he's a Bolex man. No, you want a Panavision guy,
Mm-hmm.
It really has to go to the resolution, how many pixels there are in the image,
Mm-hmm.
and the dynamic range of the image. Now, a lot of these cameras that had limited dynamic range, what I mean by that, turn this light on behind me, and you'll see that this totally blows out. There's just no information to be culled from there at all, because
Mm-hmm.
the laptop camera just can't handle it. If you shot this with a red camera, let's say, that had wide dynamic range, meaning more notes on the keyboard,
Mm-hmm.
then you'd be able to see detail in that wall. Instead of having it be all blown out, you'd be able to
Mm-hmm.
resolve things. So if you have those two, there's the choice of camera is just cost, ease of use. For myself, I find a cell phone, much like buttons on a watch, just it's too small. I want something big, and I feel like a cinematographer. But and as far as lenses and all that goes,
That's true. That's true. Being able to have the right, because you don't really when you're shooting on any kind of a phone or you don't have the same quantity or quality of lenses to choose from. It's just whatever lens happens to be on the camera natively. I mean, you can buy other ones that add, but the quality of lenses may not be that great. Is that the same for when people are shooting? Do you recommend people shoot on a red or RE, or like, do you have, if you could pick any camera that, for people that want to be able to create effects, do you have a particular preference for the camera that people use?
The red is they're all superior cameras. Their philosophies are somewhat different. I'm a fan of the ARRI system, though I haven't used them. But like with the red, it's more software oriented than
Mm-hmm.
camera oriented. There's no like on button there is, but you've got to go through all these menus to turn it on.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes its resolution by changing how much of the sensor is used.
Yes.
So that gets a little confusing when it gets into your field of view, because, okay, now we're using less of the sensor, but now I'm seeing less of the picture.
Right.
So it's not like it's staying the same composition and changing the resolution. It's actually changing your composition. So that gets a bit to get used to. The ARRI, I believe, doesn't do that. It's real straight. And when you look at the side of the camera, it's like all
It's like
these
an
things that
I think
cinematographers hold dear.
it's a cinematographer's camera. I think it's
Yeah, ISO, this is the frame rate, this is the
right.
shutter, it's like, okay, now I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than, because when you're on a set that's fast moving, you want to be very run and gun as well. You don't want to go, well, wait a minute, we have to go to, now what was that menu setting?
Yeah, what was that menu setting? That's the worst thing I hate.
Terrible. Just terrible.
Like, I'll never know. We're never getting.
But as far as effects go, the easiest thing to do is if you're going to shoot elements that have to be combined together later, take note of what camera you're using and use the same one.
Mm-hmm.
So there are times where people want to get clever and they combine 3 cameras. This happened on a movie we did about the guy who invented windshield wipers. And all these digital cameras were brand new, and said, oh, well, we'll shoot from the top with that camera, and we'll shoot film from here, and we'll shoot this from there as the car drives down the way, and we'll have everything to cut with, right? So you're shooting with these 3 different mediums, and when they cut it all together, you had the car of a different color, like the horse from the Wizard of Oz. It'd be gold in the film, and it'd be tan for the digital, and this one up here made it brown. So what we had to do is rotoscope around the damn car to make it consistently the same color as it was cut together. But like weird things. So I mean, if you're gonna, it's sometimes it's a fatal flaw to shoot with the latest and greatest and mix it in with everything else,
Yeah,
unless it's sort of like you want to look, you
mhm.
know.
Well, I think it's like a question like that bleeding edge of technology concept. So the how do you recommend that people? So one of the toughest things I think for producers is the fact that in order for them to make the best decisions for producing their projects, they have to be able to stay current with the technologies that are coming out. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to be the guy shooting on film when everybody else has moved over to video, or you're going to be the guy shooting on video when everybody has moved over to virtual production. So uh, do you have recommendations, or is there stuff that people can read, or resources that where people can find out about new visual technologies and new visual techniques?
I think what you're speaking of, that techno lust, I mean, that was very prevalent in post houses, where producers would try to finish something and then they would read a blurb in some magazine about the latest
Hmm.
Flame, Flame 2.3, and they
Hmm.
go to a post house and says, "Oh, do you have Flame? Oh yeah, you have 2.3? No, we got 2.2. Oh well, and there was hardly any difference.
Hmm.
One case in point, I mean, just keep it a secret if it works. I mean, custom film effects, who I worked with for years, was very successful when all these companies were going broke buying the latest and greatest or leasing the latest and greatest.
Hmm.
He bought himself an optical printer for $7,000, paid it off in a week,
Hmm.
and then everything else was, and just didn't really make a big deal about we were shooting all our composites on film.
Hmm.
When it got to the screen, it looked exactly the same, and
So
we
it
could do
didn't
it
matter.
faster.
Hmm.
So I think really for a filmmaker, I wouldn't get too involved with that. I mean, why are you? It's all about the final look, your movie, your story.
Well, I
I
guess the thing is
don't care what you shot.
only for budgeting purposes. In other words,
Yeah,
right now when you're at the school, you're teaching people how to pick up the latest and greatest tool sets. You're giving them the alphabet that they can use all the way from from virtual production all the way back to old-fashioned matte painting. You're giving them that
right.
lexicon. But when people leave and
Errors.
they're working in the real world and they're that you finish up a project, you're going to start a new one, and what publications do you read? Like, does American Cinematographer talk about these kinds of things? Or I don't know how people stay up to date ever. Like, how are you staying up to date as you move from technology to technology? Because you've kind of taken this long span of them. So,
I don't, to be frankly, I don't, it would drive me crazy to try to pick the right magazine or try to, oh, I better get up on this.
mhm.
I've found in my career that it's when a project comes in,
Mhm.
then you do the research.
When you think about Terminator, or you think about a lot of these people, Star Wars, George Lucas, and so forth, the visual effects that they chose to create became part of their filmmaking style. It became known for those specific kinds of effects, and
Mhm.
their films had sort of a characteristic look and feel. Kubrick, the special effects had this feel that you could look at it in a moment and you could go, "Oh, that's Kubrick." Just a lot of camera work, changing lenses and so thing, like just fluid zooms and so forth. Do you think that it's when people are creating films and they're building this lexicon that they're going to use of filmmaking techniques? Do you think that that's something that they should be consciously thinking about, or do you think it'll be a natural byproduct of their eye as they're creating their work? In other words, if they create the storyboards and you
Uh,
accurately render those storyboards, is that correct, or should they actually be thinking about, well, no, I want to be the guy that does all optical effects, or not optical, but I want to be the guy that does all my stuff practical and in camera? Or do you think it should be the case that they actually do, try to allow themselves to be flexible and see all the options that are available to them?
I think the latter. In the case of Lord of the Rings, they did everything from bubblegum and
Mhm.
tape and wire to the latest CGI. And I
Mhm.
think that wonderful mix match. But ultimately, I think the effect is not, unless it's something like a vision type of thing. That can be unique, but most effects are pretty much slaving to the aesthetic of the cinematographer. So, and a lot of times, like with matte painting, I learned so much from Albert Whitlock, uh, because he would approach those matte paintings as a painter,
Right.
and he would say, you only paint what it needs to have. And when matte painting went into Photoshop and you had committees and they were going to make the best matte painting ever, and we're going to have a volcano over here and thunder over there and lightning, and then make this mountain even bigger, and then it becomes this mishmash of it looks horrible, you know. And it takes a true artist to pull back. When you talk about Kubrick, it's more about his compositions,
Right.
which tend to be very static. And it was interesting about 2001 in that a lot of that was traditional work. The floating pen was glued onto a rotating piece of glass right on the set. So much could be seen on the set. And the award-winning Interstellar was very much all in camera with models. Very, very little was done the other way. And I heard an interesting story from Ian Hunter, who won the Academy Award for that, because Christopher Nolan, just due to the cost, everyone does previs on these big movies. And so, of course, everything was CGI'd out ahead of time, make a whole movie ahead of time. This is what the shot's going to be. So it's like storyboard on steroids, right? And he got a call from Chris Nolan once about a shot he was shooting of the miniature. And Christopher Nolan said, Ian, when you shot that shot, did you follow that animatic or that previs? And he said, yes, sir, I did. He said, don't do that. That's a cartoon. That was an idea. But if you shoot that real model and you think it looks a little bit better this way, or if you change the light that way and makes it look like red hot, please do it that way.
Right.
And that, I think, is really the best philosophy, because everything's iterative. So you start out with those previs just to kind of get a ballpark on, okay, this shot's only going to be like 48 frames, maybe 100, maybe, you know, but you kind of are trying to box it in. But when it's you're not making cans of Coca-Cola. So, I mean, you have to get some flexibility there as well, while being responsible. So it's quite the juggle.
That's really good advice. I think you're right. It makes sense to not be so married to the vision that you have in advance of production that you damage your opportunity to create something good during production.
Yeah, it's like actors may come up with something on the spur of the moment, just a different way of performing. And all of a sudden it's like, yes, let's change that line. You flubbed the line, but you made it something else, and that something else was better.
Right. Exactly.
And it gets a little, you might get a writer that gets upset, as they should, but then, they might have to be flexible too. So it's hard to say. I think Scorsese would very much treat things where, okay, I want you to hit the line here, then kind of improv a little bit and make sure you hit the line there.
Right.
And that what a wonderful philosophy, because you get this reality from the thing, that the actors are truly in the moment. Because some directors, they will rehearse, or they'll do 32 takes just to exhaust the actors in order to get some what they feel is a sense of reality. And I'm not a fan of that, because usually what happens is they cut in take one.
Right.
But everyone will have their different approach.
Well, I definitely think it's dangerous for filmmakers to try to pre-plan an entire movie. If there's no opportunity for magic to happen on the visual effects, it means you better hope that your first guess was really good, because you're not going to discover anything in production.
Well, there might be a little more leeway. I mean, with the fix it in post. I came from the era of what I described when you do visual effects, you're a sharpshooter. Because you got one shot. You better aim it right, get the windage right, get that target there, get it in, bang. Oh, we did it.
You have to, if you can do it in camera or do it on set, and you can do it quickly, then you'll favor that as an option, and then you'll branch out as things become more complex.
I'm not the guy who knows all, so I would suggest.
And you have other experts that you can refer people to. Like if somebody says, you say you should probably be using computer graphics effects for this, then you could help them figure out who they're going to talk to about that.
Yeah, I would make recommendations of certain companies that or people that I've worked with before that I would recommend.
Cool. And then do you have a do you have do you want to like, give people an email address where they can also reach you so that they can contact you via email directly, or do you just want them to reach you through your site?
Well, yeah, there's a thing on the site. The email is quite lengthy.
Okay, so just go ahead and use
Yeah, that's easier. And then what it does is it goes to my personal email, and then it gets less complicated that way.
I think that makes sense. All right, so let me go ahead and one of the first questions that we got is, do you work here in Los Angeles? Like, do you have, if they wanted to meet with you face to face here in Los Angeles, are you available for that?
Well, I happen to live quite far from Los Angeles at the moment. On occasion, I do spend certain days of the week in town in Burbank when I teach at school. But I live in the mountains of Tehachapi, which is quite a ways away. It's about a 3-hour drive. I don't mind meeting people when I'm in town, or it can be scheduled in such a way that I can coordinate my calendar. Then that's very doable. But on the spur of the moment, it would be difficult.
But you use Zoom so you can meet with people as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. I love this thing. This is a great thing.
It's a great thing, isn't it?
Buy this thing.
And then do you have a the other question that we just got was, do you ever do classes that are not for college students? In other words, do you ever do training events for people that are not kids, like grown-ups?
Well, yes. What I'm doing now with the publication of the book, we have a site. The book was co-authored by my wife, Junico Moody, and she made a site called PacTechViz, PacTechViz. And it's kind of a catch-all under the Thinkific banner to have certain types of classes. And to celebrate the book, I have a number of free mini classes about highlighting some of the films I worked on and the basic principles. Like I worked on Daylight, and I talk about the pre-planning for all the miniatures for Daylight. That's a Sylvester Stallone film where the Holland Tunnel collapses and he's trapped, and all these wonderful miniatures were used. And I have some behind the scenes footage that I show there. They're like little short lessons, only about 7 minutes long or so. But in the future, I like to get together with you, Nancy, and maybe have a live event where we arrange to have cameras and actually do workshops where things are actually shot and composited, and so people can see the general process.
I think one of the things you mentioned, especially for a lot of the very independent filmmakers, the folks that are making really low budget projects, or the projects which are short films and so forth.
Right.
Not understanding how to do green screen correctly is a big problem. Like how to light a green screen and how to make it so that it doesn't wash out characters in front of it, you know?
Yeah, well, that's one of the first lessons I give to my cinematography students. We go out to Griffith Park, and I have one of them shoot one of their classmates standing to one side of the frame, and they shoot it in bright sunlight or dappled sunlight. And they have to record where the light was coming from, where the camera was, what lens was used, all these things, so that in the next week, when they shoot in front of a green screen, they have to light that same person standing on the other side in front of a green screen in exactly the same way. And that's a great discipline to know what to look for, because it goes beyond avoiding the washed out green all over. It gets right into the nuts of the matter. You're shooting a twins movie. The evil twin and the good twin, and they're in the same shot together, and you have to green screen one of them in that particular case. You've got to not make mistakes. You've got to shoot the other one exactly the same way as the first person, and the only difference is you put a green screen behind it. That's the whole secret to those twin shots. If you like a perfect example, here's you're shooting your first person in Griffith Park. And then if you didn't move anything and you had this person stand on the other side, and the only thing you did different was put a green screen behind him, that would be the exact perfect way to shoot the shot. And the only thing you're doing that's different is you're shooting one part of it on Monday and the other part on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
But if you could magically move Wednesday to that Monday and just drop a green screen, you'd be done.
So I think it's a key thing for a lot of people mastering the green screen technologies. So we have a question from Isabel.
Hello, Isabel.
She's graduated and she loves visual effects, and she wrote her undergraduate thesis on it and won an award. Do you have any advice?
Congratulations.
Do you have any advice for any youngsters that are going into the VFX world, like how she could meet more people and perhaps pick up new opportunities? Is there a website or a place that you recommend the students in your classes look for work? Or
boy, it's a very strange employment situation there. I think time is certainly on your side.
Mm-hmm.
I think connecting with other filmmakers or even hanging around film schools, you could try cold calling for internships at some places.
I think sometimes hanging out at film festivals with, having your reel, a business card and your reel, and going to film festivals on a regular basis and taking a look at the films that are there and the filmmakers that are there, and handing out your card and saying, you do VFX and you want to work on projects, because they've gotten to the point where they've gone to the film festival. So at least they know how to finish a film. That's something, and I do think you can also reach out to people on IMDb. If you look on IMDb and you look at films that have been recently completed, you can reach out to, a lot of times, if you have an IMDb Pro account, you can see the contact information for the producers.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Email.
That's a good idea.
And say,
this is more of a Nancy question, really, because you are the network guru.
I really enjoy connecting with new people, and I like getting the right people together. It's a strange hobby, but I feel very passionate about it. So what I'd like to do is, I think we should probably, since we've been here about an hour and a half, and I do feel bad when they go on too long. What I'd like to do is go ahead and have people reach out to you at your website, marksawicki.com. When I'll edit up this video and I'll put a link at the bottom so that people can find it when they're watching it. And then can you tell them the name of your book one more time, just to make sure they can go find it?
Oh yes, it's already on Amazon. The front cover is also on Amazon, but it's harder to find. But it's called Filming the Fantastic with Virtual Technology. Mm-hmm. Filmmaking on the digital backlot is the secondary thing.
And that's specifically discussing the virtual production technologies we've talked about with virtual.
Combining Unreal set environments with filmmaking. Mm-hmm. So it's using Unreal game engine sets that you can buy on the Unreal marketplace for $20. Mm-hmm. Who can beat that? $1.95 filmmakers. And then you've got these, I explore several different technologies, several different manufacturers, I should say. All of them are excellent, but it gets the basic principles between how does the camera track itself? How does it inform the virtual camera? How do you combine the real and the virtual?
So it's a good technical Bible for somebody that wants to make sure that they're caught up with what's coming down the track over the course of the next few years in VF.
Yes, and I think it's in a very readable, friendly manner. It's not like highly technical. We have a historical review of traditional visual effects. Junico has written a wonderful chapter 2 on how CGI grew from a bunch of engineers and scientists in Utah, of all things, and it just blossomed out into Apple and Microsoft and all these things. And then we get down to the nitty-gritty of the camera tracking systems, the motion capture tracking systems, how
it sounds like a good soup to nuts primer for somebody that doesn't understand, that's new.
Yeah, I wrote it for filmmakers, not necessarily high-level cinematographers or something like that. Though I think
for people that are independent filmmakers, not.
Right. Really kind of bare bones. And there's a section I put together for schools as well, where, okay, we know you can't afford the big gizmo. How can you simulate the big gizmo using nothing more than Photoshop and After Effects? And I do walk through that. And there are ways of doing that. Loaded with compromise, but like Orson Welles said, the absence of limitation is the enemy of art. So,
although sometimes I'd like to have more enemies, I don't know. But Anyway, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us tonight, and I want to make sure I'll send you the thing to review, and I hope would encourage people to check out your book. And if uh, it's just really kind of you to spend an hour and a half chatting with us about virtual
Oh, it's
effects.
always a pleasure. You are so ingratiating, Nancy.
You're sweet. You're very kind. I really enjoy I have a really good life, you know. I get to work on the stuff I care about. So,
Mm.
all right. Thanks a lot. Have a great evening, everyone. And I am recording this and I'll post it over the course of the next day or so.
Okay. Thank you for joining the meeting.
Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.